Hey, what's up guys, it's Oakley, and EGX is underway. Coming out of that, various developer sessions, we've seen more information coming out. Now this video is going to be specifically focusing on the characters in Total War Warhammer, namely the heroes, the lords, and the legendary lords. So let's go ahead and dive right into it. And from the start, I will say it's looking good. A lot of deep skill tree customization and a lot of different pathways for progression. So let's go into this. So the main distinction is going to be between heroes, lords, and legendary lords. Now, the heroes are going to function very much like your agents, but now they have the dual purpose of serving functions in the campaign map, but then also fighting on the battlefield, but they do typical agent actions. The lords, by comparison, also fulfill roles on the campaign map and can fight on the battlefield, but these guys are immortal characters, I believe. Anything that has traditionally a name will be immortal. And then finally, you have the legendary lords. We'll talk about this more in depth and later, but these would be guys like Karl Franz, Thorgrim Grudgebear. They're very, very high guys tied to quests and all that stuff. And again, these guys are also immortal, whereas the heroes are going to be your more disposable agents. Anyways, let's dive more into depth. So let's start off with the heroes. So I said in the developer session that these are going to be essentially like agents moving around the map, performing strategic actions on your behalf. So they specifically mentioned, for example, they can assassinate, they can do sabotage. So very reminiscent of what we saw in previous games in the past. And it says they can be attached to an army and that they will appear on the battlefield. Again, that's something we knew about before. Just briefly, they mentioned that it's attached to the army. So just like you can attach a champion to your army in the current iterations of Attila and Rome 2, that is still present. And then you can actually focus your hero more on melee or magic, so you have the ability to choose how that hero is more going to progress in combat. They also have deep skill trees with lots of abilities. So for all of these, heroes, lords, and legendary lords, you're going to earn skill points, and then those skill points are going to be used on, I believe, 3 different things. It's going to be strategic, tactical, and battle. So you can invest in improving your character with those, but then you can also unlock special magic items, including battle standards, what they mentioned, and there'll be lots of rewards for your victories. So you get magic items, weapons, and mounts that come out of this. So very, very in-depth progression. They gave examples for the heroes, such as the Dwarf Thane, so he's going to be a melee infantry hero. And for the Empire, for example, you would have the Warrior Priest, who's going to be a mix of melee and magic. And then in previous videos, we'd seen them kind of show off the different characters. And for example, the Witch Hunter will probably be making an appearance as well. So kind of fleshing that out. The heroes are going to have different roles that they can do. Now let's move on to the lords. So the difference between the hero is more like an agent that can die. The lord is a little bit higher than that, it seems. I don't think they've completely confirmed this for all lord characters, but I think it seems that all lords will have a name to them. They'll come from the lore, and they will actually have the capacity to be immortal. So you can technically kill them in the battlefield, but then they will be revived. So it's just as if they got injured. And these guys, this is important. You can cast them into 3 roles that they talked about. So one is Admiral, one is an Overseer, which is like a governor, and then the third is Protagonist, which is like a politician. So interesting that with all of these, you can see they're breaking them down by 3. The first one, the Admiral, let's talk about this. So they haven't really talked about navies before, but they did confirm, and I want to make this clear, they did confirm that you will not be able to fight naval battles. Naval battles will be something that are auto-resolved, just like in older Total War games, like the initial Rome. You're going to auto-resolve those naval battles, but it's interesting to see that they also still have a Navy Admiral that you can put in charge of that. So clearly, the Navy is not going to be something that you can brush off. Hopefully it'll have trading posts or exploration or maybe even quests that require you to have an admiral to lead a fleet to go explore and collect weird items in different parts of the world. So that's very interesting, especially if you consider them expanding past the old world or into different regions where you have to perhaps go explore Lustria or something like that. So I'm glad they have this admiral position. The next one is going to be the Overseer or Governor. They said this is going to be a guy who you station in your cities or provinces, and they're going to be in charge of maintaining order, probably doing taxes, doing stuff like that, increasing the efficiency of doing buildings, increasing the rate you do production, probably just similar things that we've seen in previous Total War titles. Now the last one that they mentioned is what they called a protagonist, and I wrote in my notes it's like a politician. They didn't say much about the protagonist, but they just said he will scheme at home in a Machiavellian way. So I wasn't too sure what to make of that protagonist role, because if they already have the governor, that's sort of what I see the diplomat as. But I think what the protagonist will do is I think he's supposed to, and I'm just speculating here, I'm guessing when you are, for example, Karl Franz, you're in a divided empire, and your goal is to unite, the peoples together, the various different elector counts, unite them all behind you as the empire. So I'm probably guessing there's going to be some diplomatic level of power that you have to increase, or maybe convert people to your faction, have the empire all rally behind you. And I'm guessing that's where the protagonist comes in, where the protagonist can sway people into your favor, or he can, go into enemy lands and cause a shift in the balance of power. He can mess with it that way. And hopefully that means we have a more fleshed out internal politics. I think if there's an entire section detailed as the protagonist who's supposed to scheme at home, then hopefully that means we have a more pronounced internal political mechanism, which they started to develop with Attila, and I hope it continues to push that way. That was, to me, very interesting. And again, the lords can invest in their skill points in the strategic, tactical, and then battle skill tree, so differentiating the three. Strategic is going to be more on the sense, probably like we've seen in previous Total War games, where it's more macro level, where you can do stuff to say, I don't know, how far your army can travel before it has to replenish supplies, or the speed at which it travels, or the visibility range and all that stuff. Whereas tactical would probably be to unlock special maneuvers for your armies, maybe to allow your dwarf warriors to carry special weapons, or more tactical as opposed to strategic, so down in the battlefield. Now there's a separate skill tree called battle. I think that's differentiated from tactical. So tactical is probably going to have to do with affecting the units in your army, whereas battle is specifically tied to how your character himself performs. So you'll level up his battle skill tree to get him better weapons, or armor, or mounts, or magic abilities, stuff like that. So that's how that kind of breaks down. And I also want to differentiate it. They did sort of make it clear that the Lord leads armies, whereas the hero is attached to armies. So that's interesting to mention. I'm not sure if you have to have, just like in Attila, if you have to have a general tied to an army for it to move around. If that's the case, that'll be interesting, because then you're going to have every army moving around on the campaign map led by a named hero, which is so much better than what we had previously, which is, yeah, you had named characters before, but it was who knows what general from who knows what Germanic tribe. Now you're going to have, a crazy name for your lord, and okay, I have a personal grudge against that guy, I'm going to take him out, and he has more lore, he has specific abilities, maybe it's a giant mage spellcaster, and you have a vendetta against him, and if I fight that army, this is going to be an army that is not only badass, but has a leader that it can shoot all these fireballs and things at me. So I think that's going to be cool, where you have your generals that aren't, only good at, providing buffs for their armies, but that army itself, tied to that lord, can have specific magical abilities or specific battlefield abilities. So that is super interesting. Now when we move on to the cream of the crop, this is going to be the legendary lords. So this is where it starts to get interesting. So the legendary lords, this is news. They said there's going to be 2 of these per race. It seemed like they were going to have 1 per race. So for example, Karl Franz, I thought that was going to be the legendary lord for the empire. But no, they announced there's going to be 2 for each. So the legendary lords, just like the lords, are immortal characters, and they're going to be the big name figures from the lore. So for example, previously we had heard of Thorgrim Grudgebearer, and we also heard Karl Franz, and then Grimgor Ironhide from, respectively, the Empire, the Dwarves, and the Orcs, or the Greenskins. So these guys can also lead armies, and they also have the same skill tree with strategic, tactical, and battle. Now, additionally, if you're a legendary lord, you have a 4th tech tree that you can move up, and that is going to be the unique character skills. And that is going to be unique to each of these legendary lords. By pursuing that, this is going to be the storyline narrative tied to each character, which is very, very interesting. So that's going to be how you unlock specific weapons for this hero, or as you progress along that, you unlock different quest battles. So that's cool to see it's implemented like that, and it really gives the spice to that legendary lord character. Let's go ahead and talk about the 2 different legendary lords per race. So they only talked really officially about the dwarves in the empire. Let's go right into the dwarves. So we have Thorgrim Grudgebearer, who we've seen in the past, who's the high king of the dwarves, and he's on his, he can unlock all the way up to having that chair, and he has probably a gameplay mechanic where he has the Book of Grudges, and I'm guessing his story has more to do with unlocking specific grudges that you have to then cross out and fill out and make progress on. So that would be how his quest moves, and then he'll get to the Thundering Falls and stuff like that. So he has his own story. We already know about Thorgrim Grudgebear. Now the second legendary lord that they unveiled is Ungrim Ironfist. And he's a Slayer King. So a little bit of background that I pulled off the Lexiconum. I'm going to just quote this to you. Ungrim Ironfist, the Slayer King of Karakadrin, is the last of the line of the Slayer Kings that have ruled the keep since his ancestor, King Baragor. Ungrim bears the burden of unfulfilled vow made by his ancestor, King Baragor, who took the name Ungrim, meaning oath-bound or unfulfilled oath. By tradition, every king of the Iron Fist line takes the Slayer oath. Ungrim is therefore bound by two conflicting obligations as both the Slayer and King. In addition to his duty to serve his city as a king, he is also bound to seek out the most dangerous creatures he can find in order to achieve an honorable death in combat as a Slayer. So that's from Lexiconum, and specifically in the panel they did say that Ungrim Ironfist is going to have a tension between ruling his people and seeking glorious death in battle, and that this is going to be played out in his own personal narrative. So you contrast that with Thorgrim Grudgebear, who seems to be, the High King. He wants to rule his people, and that's kind of what he does. He has to right the wrongs in the Book of Grudges, whereas Ungrim Ironfist has to do perhaps a balancing act between those two things. So I'm wondering, as part of his quest, maybe you're going to have to balance it too, and perhaps you'll have a quest that says, as a Slayer King, we hear tales of a giant dragon in the mountains. Please go seek him out and kill him and bring back his pelt. So that's something that you may have to do. And you can see him wearing a dragon's pelt on his back, that he earned this dragon cloak actually from the High King Thorgrim Grudgebear once he actually defeated the orc Nashrak Badtooth at the Battle of Broken Leg Gully. So I'm glad that they have that. That is going to be so interesting. Now, with the duality of these legendary lords, so each of them is going to be distinguished because of their own quests, and when you start off your campaign, you have to select one of the two. Now, we're not quite sure what this means. Obviously, you select one or the other is going to mean you have a different character and different quest lines, but does it mean, just like in Rome 2, is it going to be like where you have, a choice between two different houses? Presumably, that's what it is. You would select one, and then overall your faction is going to have a flavor. It's going to have built-in bonuses and debuffs for choosing that lord versus the other one. But what it could also potentially mean is maybe even different starting positions. I think that would be so awesome if not only you have the different quests, but also you have different starting positions, because that would make instead of just having 4 main races, you kind of double that by having different starting positions based off the legendary lord. So I think that's unannounced, but for my impression, I think that would be cool. That would definitely change up the flavor of each and really freshen it up. Now let's move on to the Empire. So the Empire, we already know Karl Franz. Again, he's going to be the traditional Empire building hero, and he's going to be sort of his quest line is, like I said before, to rally the Empire behind him into a united front of the Empire. So we already know about that, and he's going to have his own quest that's going to go up to the Battle of Blackfire Pass where he gets the Warhammer. So we already know about that. The second guy who's been unannounced is going to be Balthasar Gelt. And he, again, as they say in the developer conference, is a different, more Machiavellian ruler. And he has his own unique quests, items, and skills. So let me give you a little bit of background from what I pulled off the Lexiconum. So it says here, Balthasar Gelt was the supreme patriarch of the of the colleges of magic. He originally arrived in Altdorf from the seaport of Marienburg. He had paid his passage on a merchant ship using gold transmuted from lead. By the time the magic wore off, Balthasar was long gone, but the captain placed a large bounty on his head, a bounty that few would dare to claim. Balthasar had always been obsessed with transmuting crude metals into gold. However, he was also interested in combining science and magic, which increased his knowledge of the lore of metal to greater than any other wizard. In fact, due to his research into black powder, Balthasar even became popular with the College of Engineers despite their usual skepticism of magic. After a freak explosion in his laboratory, Balthasar was never seen without his metallic robes and golden mask. It was rumored that he was disfigured. Others whispered that his flesh had actually been turned to gold in the explosion. Not an accident at all. The explosion furthered Balthasar's will to succeed until he defeated Tyrus Gorman and became Supreme Patriarch, replacing the prominence of the Bright Order with that of the Gold Order. After becoming Supreme Patriarch, Balthasar was seen on many battlefields with the Empire's armies. One memorable occasion was when Emperor Karl Franz requested his assistance to avert a civil war between the aggressive Elector Count of Nordland and the neighboring province of Hochland. Balthasar visited Castle Salzenmund and secretly turned the gold coins of the Count's soldiers and mercenaries into lead, before swiftly fleeing on his Pegasus. So there you have it, this guy who goes and he turns the Empire's war chests into useless lead. So, like they said, this guy is more into, he's different than Karl Franz. Karl Franz is the Empire building guy, very much into driving directly into battle, whereas this guy, obviously from the little story I gave you, he's definitely more involved in magic, much more heavily so, and then he likes to do a lot of this political machinations behind the scenes. So that is cool to see, and he would be the one influencing, perhaps instead of Karl Franz winning people to his side through conviction, through battles, and just being very charismatic, maybe this guy will have to manipulate it politically and a lot more of the internal politics, which I mentioned before, is something that they've been teasing that they're developing. This guy rides on a Pegasus, so overall a very different and interesting guy. Now moving on to the Greenskins. So the Greenskins, they didn't say anything officially here. We do already know that you have Ungrim Ironfist. So he's going to be big, beefy, all kind of get stuck in type of war boss. Now people have been kind of speculating who else might be the second legendary lord. And people have kind of dragged in an old piece of concept art that I hadn't seen before, but it seems to indicate that the other guy will be Azog the Slaughterer. So he looks very cool. Again, he's another war boss. And I would be a little bit surprised if they doubled up on war bosses, because obviously you want it to be a little bit differentiated. So people are saying maybe you'll see Skarsnik, or you might see some other representation of magic or the goblins, because the Greenskins aren't just, orcs. It's also the orcs and goblins. So you'd imagine if there's that dichotomy in the armies, you'll probably also want that dichotomy represented when it comes to the legendary lords. So we'll have to wait and hear. And then as for the vampire counts, they've been silent on that front all around. So nothing to get from there. But anyways, that is going to be it for this section of the overview. I'll be digging into more coming out of EGX, and I'll be sure to share that with you. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Peace out.